Welcome everyone, HSC3201, Advanced Training Principles as Prescription. Welcome to week one lecture. Today we're going basically over the general theory for advanced exercise or for developing an annual plan. So we're here today. Yes, hopefully you can see this and this will go. So we're looking at the theory and planning involved in training. And why do we need to worry about that? It comes down to the multifaceted effects of training. So we need to ensure that we have a systematic approach to how we develop and train our athletes, especially across the year. When we discuss multifaceted, what we mean is generally most sports have a number of requirements at various times that athletes need to be developed for. And so we need to think of how can we put that so we incorporate the most appropriate training at the most appropriate time. And the term that we use for that is called periodization. Now, Bomper and Matveyev from the 60s and 70s. So again, it's not really new. We just really highlighted it, formulated it, and developed it over the last 30, 40, 50 years, really. Now, what we need to understand is when we talk about an annual plan, we want to know, or how do we approach it? Now, there are a number of different ways we can look at it. Now, in the next 2 weeks, we've got the Olympics starting up. So for Olympic athletes, they'll have, all their coaches and training overseers will have a 4-year plan for them. And it will commence at the start of the previous Olympics. And it will set out 4 years to get them to this Olympics. So that's the sort of detail we go to in an Olympic. Mostly we'll look at, especially with team sports, is predominantly we're looking at an annual plan, and we'll use it as the competition. So we have 12 months. We've got a season in front of us. We've got off season. We've got all these athletes. We want to look at how can we work out how to train them without overtraining them, undertraining them, suffering injuries, burnouts, that sort of thing. And how do we know if it's working or not? So what we'd look at is we break it into smaller, more manageable components, like everything. We'll have short and long-term evidence. So we'll look at the overall plan is at this point in time, we need them to be this because we need this solid base before we develop on that component. So it's merely a case of giving yourself a roadmap. It's like if you're going on a road trip and you want to develop or get somewhere. Yes, okay, I want to drive to Cairns. You know, it's roughly 28 to 30 hours driving time. And you're sitting there, that's the end goal I want to get to. Okay, I can do it 30 hours straight, pop a few nose dives, I'll be great. But you may miss out on a lot of things. Whereas you can sit down and go, okay, it's a 30-hour drive. However, I don't want to do more than 5 hours, 6 hours driving in a day because it bores me. Let's plan, okay, for the first 5 hours, 6 hours, let's see. I might have a look around at Coffs Harbour for a day, and that'll be the first one. Then, hey, let's spend a couple of days surfing at Byron Bay. So it's that sort of component. You've got this big, long journey in front of you, and you're setting it up and breaking it into stages to get there. You know where you're ending, you know where your end goal is, and this helps you to manage it from a week-to-week basis. And it's about changing the things, increasing volume and intensity. Now, one thing you need to look, especially down high volume, low intensity, or low volume, high intensity. If your volume's high, your intensity has to be what we call relatively low. We're not talking absolute, we're talking relative low. And it's based on the athletes. So if you have a marathon runner, their high volume will run 200 kilometers a week. But their intensity might be somewhat low. So they're low intensity, but then that might be running at 70% VO2 max or even 75% VO2 max. And then they might go low volume, but for them, low volume might be running 80 to 100 Ks a week. And the intensity might be up around anaerobic threshold, around that 85%. So you can see it'll vary. Whereas with a rugby player where they only run 5 Ks in a game or cover 5 Ks in a game, their high volume might be around 6 Ks in training. And the intensity might be relatively low, is that it might be at 80% intensity. Whereas when it's low volume and high intensity, their intensity might be at 95 to 100% because of the requirements of the sport. So you need to understand relative intensities and volumes But the one thing is irrespective is if your volume's high, your intensity will be low. If you need high intensity, then your volume needs to be lower. So as volume decreases, intensity increases. As intensity decreases, volume can increase, that sort of component. Now, when we look at our annual plan, we can break it up into a series of macro cycles. We've got sub-phases. So the macro cycle is what we're looking at our annual plan. We can look at three components. We've got the preparation, the competition, the transition. Now, preparation is general or specific. So general is getting that sound base. Specific is when we start to focus and target on the specific attributes required for the competition. Then we get into the competition. Now we've got pre-comp, and that might be in the lead up to the competition. Now in the team sport, where you might 26 weeks, it might be that 4 weeks when you start playing trial games. If you're an athlete, as in track and field, the pre-comp might be 2 weeks leading into a major competition, or into a smaller competition, which is leading into a major. And we'll look about what you do in competition, how you manage your taper. The transition, that's your post-season or between comps. And pretty much it's a base of having time off to rest, both physically and psychologically. But one thing we have to understand is when we're talking about professional athletes, they don't have time off as such. But say they've just done, a 16 or a 26-week football season, they've been smashed, they're bashed. You probably have 4 weeks where they're doing something totally different, non-impact, low intensity, maybe cycling, swimming, yoga, that sort of thing. And instead of doing 5-6 sessions a week, they might only be doing 2 or 3. And that's how we sort of structure the phases. Now, that's a macro cycle with its phases in between it. And these mesocycles, this is what we would call these, generally speaking, is a mesocycle, a general or a specific. The general can actually be up to 12 weeks. Specific can be 4 to 8 weeks. Pre-comp will depend on the competition, but usually we don't go more than 2 or 4 weeks. And then we might have a microcycle. It can be a 2 to 10 day training block. And what we're looking at there is, it's going to vary. With your team sports, then you're going to look at your weekly training cycle. Now that may fluctuate because you might have a game on Monday followed by a game on Friday, and then you might have a game on Friday and a game on the following Monday. So then you can have a 10-day training week or a 4-day training week, and it's going to fluctuate. And then we're going to look at the training sessions, and that's the individual sessions. Now, with team sport athletes at the high level, you have to understand that they may have 3 or 4 sessions in a day. Now, one session for them might be a field session that might go for 2 hours. And that field session might include some field conditioning, skill acquisition, tactical, positional plays. Then some other time they may have a gym training session that they also has to incorporate. Perhaps they've got an agility session also. So we need to, how are we going to structure that across the day? And then you put in a recovery session. And then you'll have the individual sessions. So a training session dealing with what's occurring in the days, and then you look at what the individual purpose of each individual session is. Now, to give you an idea with LTAD, helps with the shorter term plans. Okay, so it gives you an understanding of what each athlete is capable of based on their chronological or biological age, and identifying the different stages. Now, we covered that in LTAD or athletic development, so just revisit that or pay attention in our other lectures. Let's just let you know, at this age, at this stage of development, they're entitled or capable of doing this. Now, the overall planning of the year, whenever you go into an overall plan of the year, the first thing is you need to analyse and assess your athlete, your team, or your sport to have an understanding of what the athlete or the sport requires. Is it power? Is it endurance? And so you can sit there and identify. You can do your own studies on it or do your lit review and identify it, hence assessment task 1. So what is it? Then we go, all right, determine the phase lengths and dates from competition timetable. So generally how we start is, and I'll use, for instance, we'll use rugby league. When you set in, you're going to sit there and get the calendar for the year, and you're going to start at the grand final. That's your goal. You want to get to the grand final. The next major point you want to look at is when do the finals start. So you want to know if you can peak and taper. And then you'll plot your games back. And during those, you may identify, okay, we've got the top 2 teams from last year at that point. We've got a couple of week games, or supposed week games at this point. So this is where we need to, and you're just identifying marks where you have to drop the volume down because they've got big games, or maybe they have a bye and okay, we can push them really hard for 6 weeks, then give them a week off where we can have a light unload week to help them refresh. Or we've got a couple of hard games, so we can just go really light on the training, on the volume, get to the bye, then we've got that 10 days and we're just going to punch them for the first 8 to 10 days, then let them freshen up 4 days going into the next game. So then you sit there and then you go, okay, there's a competition. Then we have our pre-competition. Okay, we generally have 2 or 3 buys, or 2 or 3 games, or if there's a pre-season comp, what we're going to do. And then we'll sit there and identify, and then we have our pre-comp or our general preparation. And leading into that, we'll have a specific preparation when we focus on, there's 2 ways of doing it, and quite often you'll have 2 blocks in specific prep. Now, one of the blocks may be the specific requirements associated with athletes in that sport: power, speed, strength. Okay, we've got power, speed, strength. So we're going to work on your power, speed, strength. Then you might have a testing and go, okay, this person's power's a bit off, so we need this person for their specific weakness. So you identify their weakness, they need to work on that. So they'll get 4 weeks where they work on their specific weakness. And then we go into our general preparation, and that's the off-season when we're talking about whether or not they need to put on size, building up that solid base sort of component. So you determine what's required, the general trends, the volumes, and with that, you know that if it's general preparation, yeah, okay, the volume is going to be around about, is going to be quite high. The intensity is going to be in that low to higher aerobic phase. So anywhere or zone from 60 to 70% up to maybe 85%. And you'll adjust the volume of the overall training. Rules for plan, and this is what we discussed. Determine the competition phase, volume and intensity around achieving selected targets. Work backwards from competition start. Now, if it was to be a track and field athlete, they may have a major competition being, say, the Nationals. Now, prior to the Nationals, they may have a state championships, or they might have a couple of local meets. If you watch or pay attention to the Olympics, you'll notice Usain Bolt ran in a diamond meet on the weekend. So 2 weeks out from the Olympics, and he's giving himself a test to see whereabouts he is. He knows where he needs to be at this time to achieve his best. He's got issues with a hamstring, so he's obviously also checking out, see how that was running. So you may do that with athletes. You know, national championships, they have to submit that. But before that, we'll use the next minor competition being the state. And prior to that, out from that, there might be a couple of local meets that you organise them to go to and attend, to sort of think of it as a testing battery. So you start at the major competition where they need to go, and then you work back. And in track and field, or even say Ironman events or surf competitions, swimming competitions, they may have individual events and look at, we want to peak for this one. Okay, we'll use that as a testing phase. So when we look at our macro cycle, it's planning a phase of a macro cycle, longer cycle, 6 to 12 weeks. And that's our general prep. Objectives in relation to what they need to achieve. So you want them to have a high aerobic base, muscular endurance, perhaps muscular strength, muscular size, power. Determine, what you do is you identify what's the priority and focus your training to develop the priority requirements. When you get into your mesocycles, and we're talking about specific preparation, pre-comp, and look at the objectives. Now, sitting there and go, it's no good going, okay, I want him to improve his power, so we're going to do it for 1 week, because, you know, well, the adaptation is going to take more than 1 week to take place. So, but what's the point in doing, say, strength or a neural adaptation process when that takes 2 to 4 weeks? Why do it for 8 weeks? So go, okay, that's more a neural adaptation approach, so we need that to be about 3 weeks. And we'll set it up where you might go, you know, hard week, harder week, really hard week, lighter week, hard week, really hard week, lighter week. Or you can go hard week, light week, hard week, light week, and vary and fluctuate it along that based on what your requirements are. Look, there's no perfect system to this, and in a lot of cases, because athletes are going to respond differently, psychologically, physiologically, also by their age. You've got to be like, I know I've worked, when I was in rugby union, I had a number of Wallabies, Super Rugby players in amongst with your normal, just your club football players. You've got guys who are 32 and are no longer in Super Rugby but still want to play. But if you were to beat them up at training or push it, they'll just take a step and go, look, I'm too old for this and I'll retire. So there's no perfect system, and you may have to tailor it for individual needs, and it does become trial and error, test, retest. But it's not a case of testing every week. You want to stage them apart to know that the application that you're applying is working. Okay, so you set that up. Now, when you're working on your microcycle, you're looking at the weekly load based on the phase of the year. And look, how can I vary the mode, the volume, the intensities, and the type of training? Because some people like doing the same thing, but the vast majority of people will get bored very quickly. You have to expose them to a similar drill sufficiently so that they can develop and adapt to it. But if you're constantly training, then they're changing the training, they never get to adapt. So you can't really monitor how they're achieving it. So we want variation, but we don't want so much variation that we miss the adaptation process. With your training day, you sit there and go, okay, what are we doing today? And set up the training and look at it. For instance, you've got a training day on Monday and Tuesday, you've got field day Monday, field day Tuesday. Monday's skill sets, where your team's going through their set plays, their basic skills, a few weaknesses that may have developed from the weekend, or your coaches assess the team you're playing up, and they'll focus on trying to exploit a weakness that team has. Then on Tuesday, they do a lot of running. So you sit there and go, okay, if they've got a lot of running on Tuesday, just in field work, we probably don't want to give them a heavy leg set on Monday night. So we might have to push the weights to Tuesday. So it's a way of working out how much on legs, how much off legs, and when to do that in the gym. And again, if they're doing speed and agility work, you want to put that first with endurance and fatiguing things. But if they've got a new skill acquisition, they may want to do that whilst they're fresh. Or do we want them to practice their skills under fatigue? So these are the things that we need to consider and develop. Now, when we get to our models of periodization, we can have the sequential, that is, you do 4 weeks strength, 4 weeks power, 4 weeks hypertrophy, 4 weeks endurance, 4 weeks strength. With the novice untrained athlete, that works quite well, not so much for the elite athlete. We can do the undulating periodization, and this is where you get that wave where you increase volume, drop intensity, and you fluctuate and might go into a big peak with a short drop off and then up again. So it looks a bit like those waves rolling in from the sea up to the beach before they crest. Then we have our current. This is where you're trying to train everything. And for team sport athletes or people who do multiple events in one event, such as a triathlete, where you will sit there and focus on one specific component to work on. That's the focus, but at the same time, you're incorporating other areas of training so they don't lose it. Think of it when we go back to just that sequential model. If you do 4 weeks strength, 4 weeks power, 4 weeks hypertrophy, 4 weeks endurance, at the end of that endurance, their strength's been compromised. So with team athletes, or this by using this concurrent, is you might do a little bit of strength and focusing on speed and power, but still do a little bit of strength work so we don't detrain too much in that components. Plus we'll have skills and a little bit of aerobic capacity around that as well. So it's a case of including everything, but you highlight or focus on the main point for that period of time. And then we can have the conjugate methods. Prolonged and concentrated focusing on 2 minutes can also lead to fatigue. So it may be for the elite athlete where they have to get smashed on multiple capacities in the one period of time. But you really work hard on one component. Okay. Now, if you do this incorrectly, that's where you start with overtraining problems. And overtraining predominantly is a psychological phenomenon, not so much a physiological phenomenon. It can become a physiological phenomenon, but primarily the more incident is, you know, if you've been trained and smashed and you're losing each week, it gets tougher to turn up for training. And again, what is the best method? And hopefully, yes, we may sit there and think that, yes, which one should we use? Which one should we apply to? And it can deal with most of those components, and it can fluctuate. You can be dealing with a team, and 3 people work extremely well with a sequential model, where others need a concurrent or a conjugate model, and that's when it becomes an art and experience. The more experience you have, the more do it. But what we have to do is initially, if you don't know how your athletes are going to respond, we go back to the basic fundamentals and go, this works with this level of athlete, so we'll stick, and then you have to be able to tinker it. Now, the one thing you need to understand is you can set your annual plan up for 12 months, but you have to understand it cannot be set in stone. Think of that drive up to Cairns. You go, okay, I'm going to go from the Gold Coast, then I'm going to head up to the Sunshine Coast. And you're on the way and you go, yep, straight up the Bruce Highway. And then you get just north of Brisbane, say you're around the Redcliffe area and there's roadworks. And you have to detour around. The same thing can happen. You have to be able to adapt and improvise. Sometimes, especially in teams, a team that you think is going to be really weak this season suddenly pulls out and they're playing extremely strong. And so all of a sudden you plan to go, all right, we're going to touch our guys up over this 2 weeks because we've got 2 weak teams. So you plan for a high volume to boost them up or top up their conditioning components, only to find out that those two teams are actually performing better than was expected. So you have to adjust and modify it constantly. But you're still looking at the end goal. And that's why you set the plan up, but it's not set in stone. You need to be able to adapt and improvise. All right, guys, that's week 1. Have a quick look, get onto that lit review. Drop me an email, guys. Let me know that you've seen these webinars, okay? And we'll see you again very shortly in cyberspace.